Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Ransomware Webinar. I'm Lee Lockwood. I'm joined today by Darren Strong from Concise and Janet from one of our major partners, StorageCraft. The aim of the session today is to share some of our thoughts and best practice around cybersecurity. Before we get into the presentation, though, I'd just like to go through some general housekeeping. The session is scheduled to take around 50 minutes. We'd really like to keep the session as interactive as we can. So we're happy to take any questions that you have along the way. We also have 10 minutes at the end of the session for Q&A. So without further ado.
Okay, so welcome to the webinar. As Lee has said, this is hopefully a survival guide for SMEs, and I'm sure that some of you out there, as Lee said, my name is Janet O'Sullivan. That's a very bad picture of me, so please move that along very quickly. Okay, so what are we talking about? Well, I mean, primarily we're talking about ransomware, but you may be familiar with some of these terms, and you might be hearing some of these terms. So I'm going to ask Darren here, because he's our technical guru, to explain what some of these terms mean. So maybe if you pick out one or two of them, and I think the one that really is interesting to people is that CEO fraud. Darren, just maybe expand a little bit what that means.
Yeah, so what we're seeing from the CEO fraud and whaling is basically all around trying to imitate senior people in the business. So what we would call the envelope address, so the actual display name of emails, they would imitate, for instance, the MD of the business, but actually the email address beneath would not be one of your corporate addresses. So they would then send an email in looking like they're asking you to do a call of action, which could be paying to a certain bank account or whatever they feel necessary they want to get out of your business. And you would just be looking at the MD of the business and not realizing that email address is coming from somewhere else.
And what is usually the call to action? And they're asking somebody to transfer an amount of money, or?
Yeah, what we're seeing, is the transfer of an amount of money as if you're paying a vendor supplier. Quite often as well, what we're seeing is they'll actually have a communication string to find out, first of all, how much money you have in an account, and then they'll take a percentage of that account.
Right. And have you seen examples of that in recent times?
Yeah, we've seen quite a big uplift in it, and definitely around the trying to get you to pay somebody else as if there is something that the MD wants to pay off.
Right. Okay. And I mean, what kind of sums of money are people paying out?
We've seen quite often percentages of their bank accounts. So it's something that financial advisor or financial director is used to paying out. So it's not going to be massive amounts.
Typically, we've seen thousands, and a couple of thousand. I think the highest one we've seen 30, 40,000, but the average seems to be about 10,000 of what we've seen. Okay.
So, but I mean, I think any small company like to lose 40,000,
it'd be enormously painful.
That would be enormously painful. Okay, so I suppose the one that we're here to talk more about today is the ransomware, and that how ransomware works, I suppose, is this comes into a business either through, I suppose, an email or some other link, and what it's asking the person to do is it effectively locks down all of your files so that nothing can be accessed. What they will do is they will give you a time limit. They will tell you that your files have been encrypted and that you have a period of time, usually maybe about 24 hours, in which to pay them a certain amount of money. The money needs to be paid in Bitcoins, which it's completely untraceable. They'll also inflict penalties. The longer you take to pay it, that maybe the higher the amount that you have to pay. And generally, if you pay the ransom, they will release your files. But we've also heard of cases where they don't release your files. So that's what ransomware is, and obviously it's been in the news very much over the past 6 to 8 weeks, and we've seen really an escalation of incidences of ransomware. So I suppose moving on is, can we move on? Okay. So we're going to talk about some of the myths around cybersecurity and ransomware, and I think there's a perception that a cyber criminal looks a bit like the guy that you're seeing there on your screen. It's kind of this sad loner type guy who's in his bedroom or his basement, That's absolutely not true, because the reality is that cyber crimes are far more likely to look like this. But actually they're even more organised than that, and they're very professional organisations. They have offices, they have infrastructure, and they work at such a professional level now that they have help desks. Some of them are so cheeky they actually ask you to rate the service. You know, after you've paid them money, they then ask you how was the experience for you. And they also work through a very sophisticated structure. So there was a time where the cyber criminals were, they were technically brilliant people, but now through the advent of what we call cybercrime as a service, what that effectively means is that anybody with just very little technical ability can go into the dark web, if you like, and they can download these exploit kits which allow them to target small businesses. And that's really what's seen a massive escalation in ransomware. I believe the ransomware figures, the number of attacks have doubled in the past year, from something like 25,000 in 2015 up to 50,000 in 2016, and that's set to increase even more. Okay.
Janet, would it be fair to say that those are the only instances that are getting reported, and the size of the problem is potentially much greater than that?
I would say absolutely, Lee, because what we know, and what you know better than me even, is that an awful lot of these attacks are not even being reported at all. I think there is a sort of a badge of shame amongst companies. They feel that if they've been hit, it's reflecting on them, and so they don't talk about it. A lot of them just quietly pay the ransom and get back to work. So I think, and we'll see later in the presentation, there's a statistic that something like 50% of companies have been hit. I think the reality is that a lot more have been hit. Okay, yeah. Okay, so that's a cyber criminal. Some of the other myths is that, again, I know you guys will blow this one out of the water. There's a myth that it's the bigger companies that are being targeted, and these are some of the names that you'll have seen in recent press. FedEx, Renault, TalkTalk, but the reality is that the smaller companies are equally at risk. And obviously, Darren, you deal with a lot of smaller companies locally, and you would have seen a massive increase in attacks. Would that be?
Yeah. I mean, it's these big corporates really that make the headlines just because of how much it actually means to them, and how much people are going to see that visual impact. But it's more out there. It's in that general public. It's in your SMEs, and they just aren't being reported, like we said.
Yeah.
And quite often they will just be swept under the carpet because, like Lee said, they don't want that small corporate image to be hit, so they won't report it out to the media.
Yeah, I think we have some stats on the next slide about sort of the companies. This is some of the facts that are. These are relevant to the UK, and these are published statistics. And as I say, that the knowledge here in the room is that these are probably on the conservative side. So we're saying 54% of UK companies have been hit, and of those, and this is staggering, is that 58% of those that get hit actually pay the ransom. And that's a horrific statistic. But despite that, 32% of companies lose files. And this is a very big problem for companies. Losing data is a very serious thing. 34% lose revenue, and 63% of companies losing downtime, and some of it's severe downtime. So, what you have to imagine is, well, what does that mean for your business, and what does downtime mean in your company? Okay, so moving on. So again, this is one of the myths around ransomware and cybersecurity, is that as long as you have some bit of software, some bit of antivirus, or some level of protection, that you're going to be okay. And this, we know, is not the case. And I'm going to throw it over to Darren, who's our sort of our technical guru, to talk about how this statistic is not correct.
Yeah, I mean, you really have to have multiple layers of best in practice security that's being monitored and managed and being actually configured by people that are certified on that equipment. And then lastly, it's around the users as well. We're seeing so much, exploits are still getting through, where ransomware can get through even if you have all those layers.
Yeah.
So the users have also got to be educated to a certain level to actually be able to act on that.
Right. And I think in the next slide we show a little bit about the statistics again, and again these are UK statistics. So the part of the success of ransomware is that it exploits the weakest link in most companies, and unfortunately, in most companies, the weakest link, it's the employees, it's people like you and me, and a lot of that is through ignorance, is that we don't really know what to expect. There's the statistic there that 76% of UK adults don't actually know what ransomware is, and now that may have changed a little bit in recent times, but again, I think that while some people have a very rudimentary knowledge of it, they don't have enough knowledge to be able to recognise that email that comes in that looks a little bit strange is maybe something they shouldn't be opening. Okay, so, and you see that 39% of organisations said that ransomware came in through an email, and that 29% of companies said the attack hit lower level staff, but 42% hit mid-level managers. So, I mean, you would expect in your company that your mid-level managers should be a little bit more savvy, but the sad truth is that they're not. And this is something that we're going to address a little bit further on. Okay. All right. So I suppose those being the myths and those being some of the problems we're dealing with, I guess the point of today is to say, well, how can we deal with it, and what kind of action should be taken? So I think the first thing there is to educate your employees. So Darren, what does an education plan look like, and what should people out there do to kind of get educated?
Yeah, so from our point of view and the knowledge that we gained, you've got to actually get your base point first. So you've got to understand what users are actually going to click on things and what users are going to open up attachments. And getting that base point is so critical, but also it has to be up to date and what's actually going on at this moment in time. So the emails that you send out to get that has to look like something that's going on in the local news or LinkedIn, Office 365, for instance. From there, then you've got to capture that data to say whether they are clicking on it, what they're clicking on, what they're doing. And off the back of that, you want to then deliver an amount of training. And that training has got to be short. If it's too long, people just won't click on it, they've not got time, or they just shut off halfway through that training. And then on the back end of that, then the business wants to know what they get, what is the improvement, and what is the ROI on the costs of that actual service. So you've got to be able to do that data analytics to actually show them how many emails you sent, how many was clicked, who clicked on them, what the training was done, was it completed successfully, and how is that actually reducing that curve. So, the actual statistics need to be coming down for the amount of people that are clicking. Okay.
And what's the advantage of people outsourcing their training? Because obviously there's a lot of online things they can do, but what's the advantage of going to people like yourselves and saying getting you to do the training?
It's mostly, from my point of view, it's keeping up to date. You've got to be up to date with how the emails are actually looking. You can do training on emails that people have been getting, spam emails, etc., 12 months ago, and if they got one that was up to date, they click on it still, because you're not up to date with what's actually going out around the globe. And then equally, the training as well has to be up to date. It's pointless delivering an amount of training and getting all your employees to watch that training or do that training, and actually it just not be on point for what's actually going on at the minute.
Mm-hmm. I think as well, you mentioned earlier that one of the advantages as well of outsourcing is that a lot of times the biggest culprit in a company might actually be the boss. And it can be hard for somebody internally to challenge the boss for his practices, but obviously an outside agency can.
Yeah, definitely. We would be basically employed to do this level of service, but we wouldn't tell anyone in the business when it's going to happen. Because, like you say, the people that you're communicating with will be the MDs and the financial advisors, and they are the ones that are most critical to get this level of training, because they're the ones that can make the biggest impact if they do follow those commands.
Okay, very good. Okay, so next. So this is really for Darren to explain, because this is what a layered defense system looks like. So Darren, do you want to just touch on what this is saying?
Yeah, so what we're saying here is, from a technical standpoint, you have to have multiple layers coming inside the network. So what we're trying to demonstrate and illustrate here is that the outer layer is the final triangle, and the bit that you're trying to protect is the data. The data for a business is the business. Without the data, the business will just shut down. So what we're saying here is that you've got multiple layers in, depending on the way that exploit or that hacker is trying to actually get into the business. And going through those different layers will then protect certain elements, including the user awareness, which is the cybersecurity training, antivirus, then the ones that are most keen at the minute is the patching. Patching has to be up to date. The exploits that your user is clicking on the email, it's literally trying to find an exploit that is actually potentially already known, and that vendor or software vendor is already patched. So we have to be up to date with patching. And then your last line of defense is your backup and DR. Can you recover that data if you really have to?
There's a question coming in, Darren, about what's best practice from a patch management perspective.
So from a patch management perspective, from our point of view, it has to be controlled, monitored, and tested. So first of all, you would do UAT on a small amount of user acceptance testing. Then you've got to be quick at rolling that out. So standard patches, for instance, from Microsoft, we would be rolling out within 30 days. Anything that's an emergency would be out within 24 hours. And you've got to also have dedicated maintenance windows. You can't be actually wanting to force this out, but also impacting the business operation at the same time. So you've got to have control mechanisms around that. And those people have got to know that that's happening at that time. Again, you can't just go patching things and impacting their environments, slowing them down, rebooting machines, etc., without users and the business being aware.
Actually, Darren, there's another question, just to kind of go back a step. What actually is patch management, and for non-technical people?
So lots of in the industry, people call patch management around Microsoft patching, and then the top third-party vendors that everyone uses, so Adobe Acrobat, Flash, those type of products. And the patch management is basically managing those patches being released from the vendors, managing the testing of them because every environment is different, actually removing any of those problems that you may have, and then actually rolling that out. And then also, you have to be able to report on that. It's pointless saying that you've released all the patches and they've all gone. Well, how successful was it, and what problems was that arise from it? So you've got to have that full closed loop coming back again.
Okay, excellent. All right.
And we've got shown the last line of defence being the backup and DR. Again, from an SME perspective, what's best practice for backup and DR look like these days?
Yeah, from our point of view, backups 12 months, 2 years ago was all around one backup a day. If you could recover that within 48 hours, everything was good. Now, if a businesses lose certain transactional type of businesses, if they lose an hour's worth of data, that's the business going out completely. So for me, a backup needs to be every hour, every 15 minutes if it's a DR environment, SQL environment. It's got to be managed, monitored 24/7. And then where do you store that backup? So then you've got to have an on-site appliance that is going to do fast recovery, but also it has to be off-site, because depending on what's occurred, what is the actual reason why you're saying it's going to be restoring all your DR plan, that may mean that building is no longer there. So it has to be off-site, and it has to be recoverable again in a very quick manner.
Okay. Hopefully that answers the question that came in.
All right. Okay, so adhering to cybersecurity best practice. Well, how does somebody know what is best practice, or where do you go to find that out?
Yeah, so those in that triangle, that's the technology stack that we would call it. It's okay again putting in those environments, but if they're not put into best practices, so things like cybersecurity, Cybersecurity Essentials has brought out best practice policies that we would follow and get an actual client through that roadmap and ensure that those policies are in place.
Is the Cyber Essentials the government?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so we would get them through those best practices. It's also best practices from the AV vendors or the firewall vendors. Again, it's a bit like we said before, you need to have certified engineers working on these products.
Yeah.
And that often is very hard for a small business to actually have all those skills in one place.
Okay. All right, so these are some of the best practices that you guys are recommending. So maybe sort of pick out the key ones there. And obviously somebody's asking, are we going to share the slides? And yes, we will. But maybe Darren, if you wanted to touch on some of these key best practices and just give us a little detail on the ones that you think are really important.
Yeah, so some of these are taken from that policy framework that we just talked about. And like we talked about a little bit, with updating the software and the applications, and making sure they're fully patched is absolutely critical. The latest things that we're seeing in the news is all around that patching and either not being updated or a zero exploit coming out and then not actually being on top of that with the patches. Then we've got some things that you're actually taking away from the user. So instead of training the user what a macro is, so a common macro would be an Excel, you'd open up an Excel document, it'd ask you to enable the macro. If that's actually then, that macro, in a lot of cases, is then got malware inside there. So what you're doing there is you're actually putting policies on the network to mean that that user can't click the enable.
Okay.
Again, implement software restrictions. So then the software restrictions and limited access are both the same. It's all looking at actually giving the user what they need, not everything. So, quite commonly we'll see that you'll have a shared area for your business and all your users will have read-write access to that full shared area. What you want to be doing is looking at, from an operations point of view, what does their job entail, what do they need access to, what software they need to run, and then limit them down to that actual operational structure. So it's all around that least privileges.
Okay. We have a question coming in there about somebody said we've got a lot of workers who are working sort of remotely. Is there a different best practice for those, or how do you control what they're doing?
So a lot of that is around the limit the admin access. You don't want the roaming users to have full admin access just because it's easy operationally to allow them to do things. And having secure VPN access that may have two-factor authentication to ensure that it's secure. Encrypted machines, so then the data that they do hold is encrypted. And actually having that roaming policy in place as a business. What are they able to do? What should they do? Should they have the machine shut down in transit? If they're going on an airplane or that machine going on public transport. If it's encrypted, if it's in hibernation, it's not actually encrypted. So it does your actual roaming policy say they have to turn their machines off to ensure that that data is secure.
Okay. And would your experience be that, do companies give a lot of thought to this, or have companies got policies in place? And if they don't, then they should be putting them in place.
No, what we see from prospects is that the shared area data, for instance, is just set up so everyone has read-write access, and no thought is given to actually categorising that data, see who needs access to that data, what type of access do they need to that data. It's just easier to have one pot and have everybody seeing and receiving that data. And
in terms, obviously in terms of a ransomware attack, that's a terrible situation.
Massive, yeah, because if one of those machines was to get infected, they have full access to most of your data, all your applications, and that ransomware would then just go across the network.
Okay.
And instead of that, only, for instance, if their job is to do with just one type of client, it would only infect that client structure, and all the rest would be okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. So obviously, this is my area of expertise, is disaster recovery and disaster recovery planning. This is something that our company has been doing for nearly over 15 years now. So for those of you on the line, if you don't have a disaster recovery plan already, then this is something that you need to start working on. And what we would say, a best practice for a disaster recovery plan is that the first thing that you need to do, and you may be the IT person or you may be the MD, but disaster recovery plan is not just one area of the company. This is for you and your team to sit down and to agree what it is that you need to happen in the event of a disaster. So your two starting points really are your recovery time objective and your recovery point objective, and these are industry terms which they do what they say. So your recovery time objective is quite simply, from the point of the disaster, how quickly you need to get back up and running. So what you and your team need to sit down and say was, well, what is the longest period of time we can afford to be out before it really starts to hurt our business, okay? And if you say that's an hour, it's 2 hours, it's 3 hours, it's 4 hours, well then you need to do whatever you need to do from a technical point of view to ensure that that's met, okay? That's the first metric that you need to have. And the second one is your recovery point objective. And what we mean by that is that, for example, if you get infected, how much data can you afford to lose? Because generally, if there's an outage, there'll be a certain amount of data which can get lost or which can get affected. And you know, if you were, I mean, if you were sort of in a very high moving, you know, very sort of intense sales environment, then you may be sort of generating sales and generating very, very critical data over a short period of time. And then it's very important for you that no data gets lost. So what this will actually tell you is how often you need to be backing up your system. And I think once you have those two figures in mind, then you build your data plan around that, okay? And then you sort of, I guess, you put the technical sort of resources behind it to ensure that you can achieve those metrics, okay? And I think if you scroll on there,
sorry, Dan, there's a question coming in there. So reading between the lines, you're saying this is more of a board level discussion as to what the DR plan looks like rather than just an IT focused discussion.
It absolutely is, Lee, because the truth is that it's kind of, there are things that go on in your company that really sort of you as the board or you as the owner know more than sort of maybe the IT person in isolation or the operations person in isolation, because you're the ones that know what is the value of downtime in my business. So if the business is shut down for, I mean, and we've dealt with companies where if the business is shut down for, you know, an hour or 2 hours, that could be worth 10, 20 grand in lost sales to the company. If the business is down for a day, you know, it could have a catastrophic effect. Equally, if you lose more than an hour's data, that may sort of, you know, just have a terrible impact on the company. So it's for all of the sort of the stakeholders to get together and say, well, you know, these are the critical resources in the industry, so, or in our company. So you may have servers, or you may have areas like your manufacturing division, which is it's essential that this gets back up and running very quickly. But then there may be areas of the company where, okay, if they're down a little bit longer, that's not a problem. And what you'll actually do when you start putting your plan together is you'll almost sort of triage your area, your company, and you may say, okay, well, we want the factory to get up and running first, then we'll say maybe the accounts department to come up, and you'll work through and you'll sort of say, okay, well, that's our recovery plan and that's our recovery objectives. We want everybody back up and running in, you know, a maximum of 4 hours. And I think when you know that, that's your starting point. Okay. So up on screen there, what you're seeing there, these are some of the things that when you start sort of, you know, building your plan, these are kind of your must-haves. And I've mentioned the recovery point, which is your backup schedule. So if you're creating very sort of intense, important information, then you need to be backing up very, very often. I mean, like for instance, in our organization, we've got something like 20 or 30 developers at any one time working on a project. So if our system goes down, then, you know, 15 or 20 minutes, an hour's work for these people costs us an absolute fortune to recreate that. So we would be backing up very, very often. Okay, your recovery points, well, again, how often do you need to be back up and running? And if you've got a factory running to fill in an important or critical order for a customer, then you can't afford to be down for, you know, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours a day, because that could actually have the effect of you know, shutting the business down. And these are things that we would recommend as best practice. I mean, we would say that initially you back up to a local site, but then what's very important is that you replicate offsite. And I think Darren would agree that especially now in a ransomware environment, that becomes more and more important, that offsite replication.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, we've even had instances with prospects where the backup's been only held local, and again, certain user accounts have got read-write access to that backup, and actually the malware is actually infected that backup as well as the primary data.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely got to be off-site, and depending on what your actual situation is as well, it may be that you cannot get access to that environment anymore. You know, that building may be shut off. If it's on a business estate, we've seen it where the business estate is actually shut off at the entrance, so nobody can get in and off that business estate. So you have to have another point away from the primary business that you can get access to and bring that environment back live.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's really the next point there. It's, you know, do you require offsite business continuity? And again, I suppose any of you on the call that may be sort of working in a regulated environment, or you do need to have a contingency plan that in the event that you can't access you can't access your site for any reason, and it might be a flood, it might be a fire, you know, we've seen customers where they can't access their site through no fault of their own. There may be sort of a gas leak or something that they can't access the site for a period of time. Well, then where do your workers go? What's your plan B? And do you need to have something set up where you can go and run your business for a day or 2 days, while they're fixing your own site? Okay. And the last two things there are we cannot stress the importance of these enough. It's around testing. Because a lot of people out there think they've got a DR plan, they think they've got it covered, and they never ever test it. And the first time they come to test it is when something actually goes wrong, and they find that it doesn't work quite the way they want. I read a report recently where it was a report that interviewed the MDs of companies and the IT directors of companies, and they asked both of them, what is your expectation in the event of a disaster? How quickly do you think you'll be back up and running? And the MDs all said 11 hours, and the IT director said 30 hours. So again, it's hugely important that everybody in your company has the same expectation, and that you've tested it, and that you know that you can do it. And that's what a good DR system will do for you. It'll say, okay, we're testing this once a year, twice a year, and we know that, okay, we're targeting to get back up in 4 hours. We tested it, okay, we're at 5 hours. So what do we need to do differently in order to ensure that we're back up in 4 hours? And it just means that you've got the confidence in it, and it just means that you can sleep better at night. It also means that any of your stakeholders, you can tell them, yes, we've got a DR plan in place. And again, for any of you who are out there sort of maybe looking at bigger contracts or going after anybody who's looking to secure a contract with, I don't know, sort of any of you in the retail industry, people like Tesco, anybody who's looking for government contracts, it's for you to say, yeah, we've got this in place, and it's another big plus for you, and it might give you that competitive advantage over some of your competitors. So
I think as far as that testing and simulation as well, Jan, I think that's where the offsite comes in as well, and it's so strong. Where we come across people that haven't done that simulation and that review of what the DR is, it's because it's actually, they can only recover to their on-site primary location, primary hardware. And the impact of the business of doing that is massive, because you're going to take down all the operations. So having an off-site location where you can actually bring up the whole environment means that you can do that anytime you want to, any time of the day.
Yeah.
And then actually get those primary users or primary operations to come on that off-site environment to test it further.
Absolutely. And I mean, I suppose the big thing as well is that, there is a perception out there that, if you have a backup, that's fine. But, again, not all backups are recoverable, and that can go wrong. So again, this is why you test. Okay.
One of the questions come in there is around, I think around the technology stack. So they're basically saying, as a business, they are quite heavy on social media. So how can they actually limit their user access or monitor their access? I'd like to answer that. So basically, if you put an up-to-date checkmarked firewall in place that doesn't just have the firewall capabilities, it also has the application management. From there, you can then restrict within groups who can access what applications, what websites, and not only what websites, for instance, with the social media, you can also say who can actually do things on those social media websites. So they've now advanced to the level where, for instance, some of the social media where you can post, or you can read, or you can download, or you can blog about it. You can actually define who is going to be able to do that and on what machines. So if you see it as a massive high risk, you can actually have a demarked zone where that machine or those machines will be used for that actual access.
Okay. All right. Next slide. Okay, so any more questions coming in? So we have one here about what are the typical payouts in a ransom? What are the typical amounts that are?
So the ones that we've seen, Janet, are reasonably small, kind of £500 or £600 worth of bitcoins, and the reason for that is because the success rate of the hackers and the ransomware bad guys, it's a high success rate for them to get paid that level of money. They're not holding out for tens of thousands of pounds, because rarely they get paid, and they're not quick to get paid. And conversely, for a small SME to recover from such a tragic situation for kind of £500 or £600 it almost fits into the no-brainer category, and that's why we're seeing so many of them being actually paid.
Yeah.
And as one of the stats showed before, just because you pay the ransom doesn't mean you're actually going to get your data back. So.
No, you're absolutely right, Lee. And I know that those of you on the call may have been familiar with last year. Sort of the big virus was CryptoLocker, and I think I read recently where CryptoLocker actually earned its creators over $1 billion. It's been I think it's been the most successful exploit so far. So, you know, okay.
There's another question here around what type of operating system is actually getting infection. So people are saying, one person's asked, is Windows 10 still infected by malware or being hit by malware and has a risk to it? The answer to that is yes, because for me, it's not only the fact you've got Windows 10, it's what actual applications are sat on there. What version of Adobe, what version of Flash. And also, it may not be that machine that gets infected, it may be another one, but then it spreads using the network to that machine. And quite often, the biggest thing we see is that local users have actually got local administrator rights. So then straight away, that malware can do whatever it wants, logged on as that user, and just spread throughout the network.
Yeah. Okay. We've got a question coming in for you guys. Do you recommend having cyber insurance?
Yes, cyber insurance is becoming more prevalent now. We're having a number of inquiries from clients and prospects as to who they should maybe partner with from a cyber insurance perspective. But that industry is gathering pace at a rapid rate of knots now. So yeah, it's definitely something as part of the overall solution worth considering, definitely.
But Lee, would I be right in saying that just to get the cyber insurance, before you do that, you would have to kind of have all of those technical things in place?
Yes,
right.
It's a short answer.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So a question coming from somebody just about, we're hearing of, big companies being attacked by ransomware, and if they can't protect themselves, then, what chance do we have?
Basically, they've got exactly the same problems as you have. If anything, they are just quadrupled. The biggest problem they have is actually the size of the environment. So when Microsoft release a patch, it's the time it takes them to actually get that through to that environment and actually make it compliant. And quite often, they also don't have the tools that you would expect them to have to allow themselves to do that. They wouldn't have remote management tools to be able to deploy out to the agent in such a high successful rate. And SMEs have got exactly that same problem. If you've only got one person, he's having to wear so many different hats and actually have all those capabilities and know everything inside out, as well as responding quickly to something that's just been released.
Yeah, and they've got more people.
Absolutely.
So they're greater the risk.
They're greater the risk. The question here is, should I be stopping my employees from using the internet?
No, it's all around restricting what they can do. It's a little bit like we just talked about the data. It's what do they need to do for their role? Do they need to be going on social media? Do they need to be going on to private email? That's a big one that we're seeing in a minute, which is being used heavily by all your people that are trying to hack and do malware. There should be very little reason why in a corporate environment you're allowing people to see private email. All that is getting past all those technology barriers that we've just talked about and coming straight onto your corporate machine.
So you're saying that if I'm viewing my Gmail account from my work laptop, that's a risk? Yeah,
those perimeter in that triangle that we just talked about around email filtering, protection of that email coming in and actually filtering it and actually seeing what's the content of that is all bypassed by you going to a private email. And then again, if you've got local admin rights, whatever you click on has got full admin rights. So you click on an email that's got an attachment in it, and that has not been seen by anything, and then it starts to infect the whole environment.
Okay. Is there a danger in companies, because I've seen this, where there's almost a blame for people who've clicked on links and that, and does that actually hurt? Like if employees aren't confident about reporting to the IT, I clicked on this link and I'm worried about it. Does that sort of accelerate the spread of a malware?
It can do, yeah. What we've seen is there's a level of expectation that people are more have better IT skills than perhaps that they do have, and there is that feeling that people should understand IT. They should know what a dodgy email looks like, and the reality of it is a lot of people don't. We ourselves run the email training that we talked about, and we had quite a high success rate. It's probably the wrong word, but we had quite a high number of clicks on things that had macros in that we'd purposely embedded false viruses in, just to make sure we see how well trained our staff we thought they were. And yeah, we saw a surprisingly high number of clicks where we thought perhaps that we shouldn't have seen them. So
yeah.
One of the questions coming in is around would we recommend the payment of ransomware if they was to be infected? For me, though, it's around when you see those payments being done is because they haven't put any processes and policies and thought in place about how we're going to protect ourselves, what we're going to do if, and actually the payments are being done because they have no other option. Yeah. The policies and procedures haven't stopped it, and the users have clicked on it, and then the backup and DR hasn't captured that data. So the only way of getting that data back is to go to the ransom and actually pay it. Someone asked another question around are cloud-based systems more vulnerable than on-premise systems? They're equally vulnerable. Yeah. They're running the same operating systems. They've got the same firewall system ports open because that's how you're accessing that service. Yeah. And quite often it's the fact that the users are clicking on things and they've got full rewrite access to whatever's in the cloud.
Yeah, I think the other thing to just stress is the whole idea of social engineering and the way that these viruses are deployed to companies, and very often they are targeted attacks. So what happens in that case is that if I'm a social engineer and I'm targeting your company, what I will do is I can very quickly go on LinkedIn, I can get an idea of who's working for you, I can check out who your employees are, I can look at their Facebook pages, and you build up a profile of the people that you want to relate to. So I can create an email to send it to one of your employees so that it's a very convincing email, and it looks like something that they're either expecting, or it looks like it's from somebody that they know. And the thing is, like I can tell you that in marketing terms, an email that's sent out as a part of a marketing campaign generally has an open rate of around 25%. But the ransomware sort of phishing type emails generally have an open rate of about 45%. That's how good they are. That's how well they can target your business. So when people open them, it's not through carelessness, or it's not because that they that they're stupid. It's just that they have been victim of a very clever manipulation. So again, that's why, and I know, like when Lee talks about that they all open the link here. Again, it's because you're giving people something that they expect. So again, that's why you have to just sort of keep the vigilance, and I suppose that's a question for you guys: is how often would you recommend sort of retraining, or is your training program is it sort of over a period of time, or how does it?
The way that we run the training program is it's continuous through 12 months. It's done. You just mentioned marketing. It's done very much like marketing. So you actually set up a campaign, and within that campaign, you're setting up certain triggers for certain groups of people, and then what happens is, people that aren't reacting to that email don't get as much email noise. People that are reacting to it then get tailored video training and then get another round of that type of email. Right. And then they constantly move up that pot to become more and more high-level risk, which means they get more video training. And obviously, all that is done within the reporting as well. So people in the business and also ourselves can see who is the major offender, and maybe some extra training that needs to be done outside of the program.
Yeah. Okay. We have actually one more question: that if you do have a server that's or you do have data that's encrypted and you don't want to pay the ransom, is there any other way to get your data back?
It's all down to the backup and recovery.
Okay.
There's very few times. I mean, odd times we've seen where the ransomware has actually encrypted the data, and somebody out in the web has actually created a recovery tool to do that. but that's sort of 99% non-successful. The only way you're going to get that data back is to have a successful backup in DR policy and plan, or pay the ransom.
And again, I suppose because it's important to notice the number of new strains that come online
is seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke to a major AV vendor, and they were saying that is the biggest trend over the last couple of years, that they would see a certain strain of malware, ransomware come out, and that would be out for a month. Now it's continuous every second. The malware is intelligent enough to keep recreating itself.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thanks everybody. We don't have any further questions coming through. We're going to reach out to all of the attendees, so thanks again once for attending. We'll reach out to you directly to see if we can be of any further assistance. Concise and Storagecraft have got an e-guide that we'll email out to you as well, and the recording will soon appear of this webinar on the Concise YouTube channel and shortly on our website as well. So again, thanks very much for your attendance. We hope you found it useful, and take care. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now.